Alrighty, everybody, welcome in. My name's Joe, and it's time for some chess. So in this game I got to play, this is against the strongest opponent I've ever played against. My opponent at the time of this game was rated 1757 in Lee chess. Now, my rating hovers between 1600 and 1620 on a good day, so this is by far someone who's well above my rating. My opponent led off with d4. We've been playing a lot of the King's Indian defense. This gives me a chance to play it, so that's what I do. I go into the King's Indian defense. My opponent leads off with their knight. Haven't stopped me from my plan, so I push my g-pawn. And then my opponent plays their bishop out. This is a London system. I don't know the London system. I don't understand these kind of Londons and Englishes. I don't quite get them. I know that these positions can develop when you play like a queen's pawn or a queen's gambit type position. I've seen these positions come up, but that's all that I know about them. What I do know is the King's Indian defense is a flexible enough defense, and I know enough of the themes. Maybe I don't know the specific move order, but I know enough about the themes that I can play a strong game no matter what. This does not stop me from my plan, so I continue on and I fianchetto my bishop. I am ready to go. My opponent plays bishop to e5. I don't know this move. This is the first time I really kind of questioned what my opponent was doing. I don't get it, but that's okay. I know that one of the themes in the King's Indian is this d6 pawn breaker. The idea is that whenever your opponent plays their king's pawn, you respond with d6, so that way they don't get access to this e5 square and tempo on your knight for free. So I just used that theme to my advantage, and I just played d6. Now my opponent has to decide what the heck they're going to do with their bishop. He captured. Okay. One of the themes of the King's Indian defense is the black player's dark square bishop becomes one of their stronger pieces. And so any chance to trade off the opponent's dark square bishop means that black controls all the dark squares by themselves. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a very strong position to be in, where you control half of the board without any competition. So the question is, I'm taking back one way or the other. I probably should have taken back with the e-pawn. When I was doing the analysis after the game, the engine gave him equal weighting. But one of the themes of the King's Indian is to use the f-pawn to break apart the center. And so if I have two f-pawns, which I would if I took back, then I could basically have a free f-pawn to bust up any center shenanigans that happen. But then I was conflicted because I kind of like leaving that pawn there until I need it. Right? It would be nice to be able to throw it at the board and bust open the center this way. Also, if I put it here and I don't get a chance to move it, let's say my opponent blockades it with a knight or something, then I've blocked in my powerful piece. So I decided I'm just going to take with the bishop. The engine gave it equal weighting, and so I probably thought about it too much, but I wanted to follow along with those themes, right? The themes of my dark square bishop is powerful, and I want it fully powered up. I want to keep these pawns in reserve to bust open the position. My opponent continues to develop. I castle, and here comes the e-pawn. Now I am ready to start busting open the position. One of the themes is this queenside knight, to prepare to rotate it around, and you can rotate it around one of two ways. The idea being that it's going to make a walk all the way over to this king side to get involved in the king side attack. If the center happens to close down, you can always look at putting this knight on c5. That's another theme, is this knight ends up here on c5 and supports the center that way. In this case, I decided to get my knight ready to walk around. My opponent develops, and I thought, you know what? Let me go ahead and bust open. I've got lots of control here on this e5 square, so let's start the busting open. So I go ahead and start busting open, and my opponent closes the position down. Now this is very typical. This is something that we know, because now here's our target. Our target is the base of the pawn chain, and that's basically what we're always looking for, is the base of the pawn chain. Whatever's the most advanced pawn, we're looking for the base of that pawn chain, and the central theme of the King's Indian is always having that f-pawn break prepared. Well, now we've got it prepared, ready to go. So we get our bishop out of the way. My opponent is strengthening their f-pawn. They know that this is coming. I go for the f-pawn break. My opponent chooses to castle, which is probably the best move. And when I was looking at the engine moves, the engine basically says you can either capture or you can castle, or there's another move you can make, which is queen up, which my opponent does play here soon enough. But now this square has been vacated for my knight. I don't take yet. I'm just going to go ahead and build up pressure. Now here's where I miss a tactic. My opponent has 3 attackers in this pawn. I have 2 defenders in this pawn. I need to move my knight out of the way to open up my rook on that pawn, and I thought too much and I outthought myself. Like I said, when I was analyzing the game, the engine says that this is a good move by my opponent, because if everything else gets traded away, my opponent is going to rip apart my king side and end up with a queen sitting here fat, dumb, and happy, and that's exactly what you don't want. So I should have rotated my knight out of the way in any one of these squares. I could even have brought my knight all the way back if I wanted. But, you know, I've been walking the knight up this way. I should have just continued the knight walk, and I didn't. Big Brain Joe got a little overthinky with himself, and he said, well, once we bust open this, the d-pawn is going to become very weak. I would love to be able to have something ready to challenge the d-pawn. And so I decided, you know, I'm going to go ahead and develop my bishop, help control the c6 square, so that when I start busting open the d-pawn, when I go to pick that up, I'll have extra pressure and I can pick it up for free. Unnecessary. That's not one of the things I need to worry about. When we talk about the King's Indian defense, this c-pawn push is used to bust open the position. You don't need to support it. It's already supported with a pawn. So I wasted a move here my opponent should have taken advantage of, and my opponent didn't. But now we have tactics. Now do you see what I see? What did my opponent do? Undefended piece. If I can just move this knight out of the way somewhere, I have a free attack on that knight. So I start looking for ways, a discovered attack, right? I could simply slide over, and then my opponent simply slides back, or does whatever they were planning on doing with this knight. I don't know why. Honestly, I don't know why this knight is so far advanced. I don't know what its goal is, unless it's just to destroy, you know, sacrifice, maybe. Maybe sacrifice here, and then bust open all this. I'm not exactly certain. But either way, my opponent played this aggressive move. So I started looking for discovers. Well, that doesn't work because the knight just comes back. But now my opponent can't take because that's an under attack. You know what? We're busting open the center. So that's the move I decided to go for. I brought my knight over, attacked the center. Now my opponent's knight has to retreat, or we just trade knights and I still win the pawn. So either way, I'm happy. My opponent retreated the knight. Now my knight is under attack. I have to do something with it. And I've got a couple of things that I could do. I decided to just go ahead and bust open the center with the f-pawn. If my opponent takes back with the bishop, yes, there's an attack on this knight, but I can always defend that knight, right? I've got lots of ways that I could defend this knight. I could always bring the knight back if I want, right? There's no stopping me from bringing the knight back. So anything I want to do at this point in time, I'm happy with. I finally got my knight, my other bishop, into the game in the King's Indian defense. The light square bishop is a very weak piece for black, but you don't really have to do anything with it. I've seen games where, here, move 15, right? We're on move 15 right now. I've seen games where move 15, that bishop is never developed, right? I think I even talked about that in one of my videos on the King's Indian. That bishop just never developed. And here I've now moved it, wasted 2 tempo on this bishop that I didn't really need to do. So, whatever. I've gotten it involved in the game somehow. It's not a great piece, but it's working. My opponent continues to develop, now has 2 attackers in this knight. I only have 1 defender on this knight, but one of the plans was always to rotate the knight away anyway. My knight is on this lovely outpost. Well, not really an outpost, but it comes with tempo. My opponent has to bring their queen right back. And then I decide to go ahead and trade, right? My light square bishop is a dead piece anyway in the King's Indian, so I just trade it off. And I remember at this point in time in the game, I remember, excuse me. I remember at this point in time in the game, turning to my wife and saying, I'm facing an opponent much stronger than me, and yet I have done everything I've wanted to do in this game. This is a success. I'm probably still going to lose this game, and that's okay, but from the opening through the middle game, I have done what I wanted to do, and I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, and I've done it by using the themes of this opening. This is a success, and I'm here today to brag about the success of playing against a player much stronger than me. Like I said, I checked their rating, and they have many games they played. They're a strong player. I've gotten everything I want out of this game. So all I have left to do is develop my queen, bring my other rook into the game, and I have completed my development, and I've done it in a way that I'm proud of. My opponent retreats his knight backwards. And yeah, so now the question is, where does this rook go? I spent a long time trying to figure out what to do with this rook, and I shouldn't have. I spent more time than I needed to trying to figure out where to put this rook, and then I ended up just plunking it here on d8 underneath the queen. My thought process was to bring it over here because I'm going to help support this pawn push and continue to break open this king side and use this pawn as part of the king side attack. The next theme that I've started to look at, and again, at this point in time, I even turned to my wife and I said, I don't know what to do. I have done everything I've wanted to do. I've completed all my objectives, and now I'm at a point in the game, I don't know what to do. So this is where I have to start looking at taking an advantage and converting the advantage. Now, in my mind, I have an advantage because I've achieved all my goals. I have achieved everything that the King's Indian Defense has taught me to achieve, and I've done it all. So the one thing I want to do is I want to open up my dark square bishop. Well, that's going to require moving a pawn. Well, I want to support that pawn. Well, if I'm going to support that pawn, I might as well support that pawn and shift all my pawns to light squares so that my dark square bishop becomes powered up. My opponent doesn't have a bishop, so I don't really care what squares they are on from my opponent's standpoint. He has a pair of knights, and the pair of knights can pick up pawns. But as long as they're in a chain, all I have to do is defend the back of the chain. So here I am thinking if I push the c-pawn, my queen defends here, and then I can push. That's my thought process. So that's what I start doing. It's a slow move, I understand. This is a bad move. Now, I want you guys to stop and tell me, why does moving my f rook to the e file, why that's a bad move? Now, of course, the whole point here is my opponent is attacking this pawn twice. I'm defending this pawn twice. But if I'm going to move my d pawn, I'm going to undefend that pawn. So I need to defend that pawn, right? What's the theme of the King's Indian Defense? One of the main kind of themes we talk about is the f pawn push to break apart the center. Why are we breaking apart the center? Well, the whole purpose is to open up files. My rook is already on that semi-open file. Why would I move it off of there? That was a dumb move. Not because it loses the game or it blunders a piece, but thematically. Because we know the themes of the King's Indian Defense, why should I move this rook off of the nice, beautiful F file? There's no purpose at this point in time. Now, if there's a reason to move it off, sure. But there's no real good reason right now. The only reason I can think of is, well, I want to push this pawn. I could support it with a queen if I wanted to, right? All right, the queen's not a great defender, but maybe I move the knight and I start rearranging it that way. Or maybe I don't support the pawn. Maybe I let the pawn go. Maybe I think of a different plan. I don't know, but this rook move off of the F file, I'm mad at myself because it's very anti what I've set up this whole game. All right, so I move the rook off. My opponent drops the knight back. Now it's tactic time. You ready for a beautiful tactic? This is big brain time. Big brain Joe steps in. I'm going to sacrifice for a pawn. Now, if my opponent does nothing, I just come right back and I've won a free pawn. If my opponent takes with the king, slide, and this is what happened in the game. I slide up with the queen, attack the king. The king has to retreat. Now, if the king retreats here or here, which is the only retreats the king can do, I just pick up the knight. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to go here because I pick up the knight with check, which is a very good thing for me. The king will have to come back to the open file, and then I can start bringing the rest of my pieces into the game. All right, the attack is happening. You guys paying attention? You guys watching? Because what did I miss? The knight that was here, that rotated back, he just stuck it back in front of the king. They're defended. So I don't get my knight back. So I've now so I was up a pawn. I was up a pawn at this point in time. Done everything I wanted to do. Now I'm going to bust open the king's defenses. I sacrifice a knight, and my opponent perfectly plays it. I don't know why I missed that the knight could come right back and defend, and now I don't get the knight back. So now, instead of being up 2 pawns, I'm down a piece. Now, it's okay. So I've traded 2 pawns for a piece. It's not the worst trade in the world, but it's not what I was expecting. And now, look at the even bigger blunder. That rook has to come right back to f8 to put another attacker here. If that rook, let's go back. So here, if I had just gone with my queen instead to help defend, to prepare this, and then my opponent shifted knight, and then I'd gone for the sacrifice, there's already 2 attackers here. I win a full piece there. Now the tactic works. Now it works. Because this F file is open, because that's one of the themes of the King's Indian, because people who are smarter than me study these kind of things. Anyway, that's not how it went over the board. My opponent defended. I had to bring the rook right back to put an extra defender on here, or an extra attacker. My opponent made a mistake. This is another mistake my opponent made. My opponent needs to defend this knight. He defends with the queen, and I'm confident my opponent's looking for a queen trade to simplify the position. I'm the one attacking, so I want to keep the queen on the board. My opponent's defending, so he wants to get the queens off the board. But the queen is not a great defender, and because the F file is open, I simply stuck my rook up here, attack the queen. Now the queen has to retreat. I forget where he retreated to. Queen e2. Yeah. So he still has 2 defenders. I still have 2 attackers. I bring the 3rd attacker over. Now my opponent has to bring a 3rd defender. He brings a 3rd defender over. But unfortunately, because we were attacking so hard, and because my opponent had to defend so hard, and because he tried to defend with the queen and lost the tempo by having to retreat it, he can't use his other rook. I get a fork. So now my opponent has to make a few choices on what he wants to do. There are no good choices in this point in time. The idea here is either my opponent moves and lets me have the full, let's basically take a full knight with check, right? Even if I go here, no, I wouldn't go. Yeah, no, I wouldn't go here. I would just straight up take a full knight, or he, I don't know, gives up a full rook, a full knight, or what my opponent chose to do, give up the queen for a rook. And notice the knight's pinned, so the knight can't take back. I still have 2 attackers. My opponent does have 2 defenders, but all of a sudden this game is getting a little shaky for my opponent. Now material-wise, it's not that huge of an advantage. Let me just play a couple more moves here. I slide my queen out of the way. Notice my queen is under an attack, obviously. I debated on sticking the rook up here, but I was worried that my opponent would do something like this, and then even if we traded off rooks, my queen is still under attack. And notice, right, the knight defends, so I can't take the rook because now the knight is no longer pinned. So I debated on sticking the rook up here to kind of infiltrate or intercept the king's attack or the rook's attack. I decided to just recover. So I dropped my queen back, decided to figure out what my next plan of attack is, and my opponent did the smart move and doubled up. Now, if we look at the material on board, a rook and a piece, a rook and a piece, a rook and a piece for a queen. So 8 points of material versus 9 points of material. I also have one extra pawn. See, 2 pawns, 2 pawns, 3 pawns, 3 pawns. I have one extra pawn. So a queen and a pawn versus a rook and a knight. It's not the end of the world. Especially considering the fact that what's my opponent's plan? My opponent has doubled up. My opponent wants to infiltrate down here somewhere. The most logical course is my opponent to infiltrate right to here, attacking my queen, forcing my queen to be even more passive, because if my queen moves away, my opponent starts picking up pawns. My queen's going to have to drop back and be even more passive, allowing my opponent to trade off a pair of rooks. You see how it goes here? It can get ugly pretty quickly. It's not the end of the world at this point in time. This is the infiltration I'm most worried about, so I played bishop up to stop the infiltration, and if at this point in time we look at the evaluation says that black is ahead by a lot. And my opponent, who's ranked 1757, apparently saw this and chose to resign the game. There was not a time issue. My opponent and I both had plenty of time left. My opponent resigned the game. I have an overwhelming advantage. In my eyes, I don't see the overwhelming advantage. It would be difficult for me to play this for a win. Should be easy enough for me to hold it to a draw, because I've got strong pieces, and I can put myself in a situation that I can cause problems for my opponent. Even if I have to trade, some unfavorable trades, if I have to give up my whatever, it's not the end of the world either way. I could probably hold this for a draw, but it would get complicated. And my opponent decided that he saw the advantage, and my opponent decided to drop and resign the game to me. So this is a win for me against a 1757, the highest rated opponent I've ever gotten a win against. I think that my game plan here would be to tuck my king up. I don't know that I can defend all of this, so I'd probably use these as attackers. Keep my king back here defended with these pawns. Or maybe do I just start pushing these guys and just continue an attack? I don't know the game plan from here. This would be hard for me to convert, because I don't know how to convert these advantages. I have an overwhelming advantage according to the engines. And when I look at the engines, multiple lines, multiple lines. It's not just one magic move that gives me an advantage. It's all moves that give me an advantage. So even though material-wise, if you look at the thing, I'm up 2 points of material, right? A rook, a knight, and a knight versus a queen, a bishop, and 2 pawns, or a queen, a bishop, and a pawn. It's not that big of a deal. But apparently it is. So we get the win. We built ourselves an overwhelming advantage, and the beauty of it is we did it by following the themes. All we did was stick to the theme. We don't know the specific move orders. We don't have to know that. We just stuck to our themes. We played solid chess. When our opponent made decisions, we tried to figure out what that decision would lead to. We tried to make the best decisions we could without throwing things away. The theme of the King's Indian, bust open the center. My opponent tried to close it down. We prepared to bust open the center. I missed a thing. Oh, there's another tactic here that I missed with this attack here, this knight. Something I missed when I was studying the engine. Notice my king. There is a pin waiting to happen here. Now, granted, I can defend that with my pawn, so I can end up winning material back no matter what. But there is a pin here that I do have to be aware of. My opponent missed it. That's probably the best defense my opponent probably could have had, would be to maybe even something like this. Pick up the pawn here. I don't know. But yeah, so when I went for my tactic, there is a weakness here, and that is one of the dangers of the King's Indian defense, right? You are pushing that f-pawn. You are weakening some of these squares, and something you have to be aware of. I missed it at the time, my opponent missed it at the time, and it just gave me an opportunity to continue the attack, which we did. And this knight was going to be rotating over anyway. My opponent just happened to give me an option to do it anyway with tempo, which felt great. And yeah, we did everything we wanted to do at this point in time, and I'm content, I'm happy. I probably should have brought this rook all the way over to e8. It's probably my big mistake, knowing that I'm going to start pushing these guys, and I want to support that. Taking this rook off of the f-file, it's kind of a dumb move, only because of the themes. Missing this, completely missing the fact that this knight rotated and then just rotates right back. Oh well. And then we got lucky with my opponent basically defending with a queen when he probably should have just defended with the rook straight away. But that's okay, we got lucky there. And forced my opponent to make some bad choices. Took away his only possibility for an advantage. All I have to do is slide my king up and I can defend it. And we got the win. So probably my opponent resigned too soon. Probably this game would have been a lot more complex, but I just wanted to show it to you that sticking to the themes, we can do good things and we can punch way above our weight just by knowing a few basics, all right? So stick to your notes, stick to your themes, go out there and play chess. Don't be afraid to lose games because you might just win a random one or two, and that's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.